Testing. Good. Okay. So, Dr. Basri, thank you for seeing us. Global Garden, we're very impressed with what you've been up to. And we'd like you to tell a little bit about how you got involved with this in the first place. And also, you're just getting back from Japan, so we'd really like to hear what your impressions are of what's going on there. And, so go ahead, take it away.
Okay, so I became a physician and went into private practice almost 24 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came up here to Middletown to join the practice of a physician that was related to my wife, her uncle, and he was also a firefighter. So when I came up, he said, maybe you should think about joining the fire department, which was a new thought to me.
Yeah.
But I did, and I enjoyed it. And then I became a firefighter fighting fires, going inside burning buildings, and it was very exciting.
Yeah.
And I was younger, I was 32.
Yeah.
And I looked at it sort of like being on a sports team. It was like a bunch of guys I enjoyed being with, and there's training, and then, in the middle of the night you go and you do this great thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very comfortable with it, and I did that for a while. And then an opportunity came to become a county fire coordinator to help at the county level and to, of course, do more of the medical side of it, but I could still be a firefighter, which was great. So in 1992 I started doing that. And then 2001, 9/11, I was on my way to the office, and I was in the car, and I heard on the radio that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And I immediately thought of my sister, who worked across the street at the World Financial Center, and I thought, I hope she's late for work, and I hope she's not there. And then I came to the office, and shortly thereafter somebody came in and said a second plane had hit. So I got my fire gear and went down to the city. And I got down there at 10:30, just after the second tower, the south tower. Actually, the north tower was the second tower to go down. So right after the second tower went down, I got down to the Trade Center. I have red lights on my vehicle, so I was allowed to go all the way down, and it took me almost no time to get down. But I arrived there about 10:30 in the morning, and I came in through the Winter Garden and along the Hudson River.
Yeah.
So I parked my car and then walked along the West Street and came in to the area around the marina, and that's how I accessed the area around the South Tower. So I was the first physician to the South Tower. And I was in the cloud, and found people that were dead and injured, and helped one firefighter out.
And you were the first doctor, and you were coming from Middletown.
Yes.
Right?
There were no physicians. Well, it's easy for me to say I'm a physician and I'm the first one there, because physicians wait at hospitals, they wait for the ambulance to bring the people to them, but I went in. So I remember helping a black female police officer who was just hysterical. She was just, literally across the street from the heap that used to be the South Tower, and trying to comfort her and get her out of that area. And then there was a firefighter, a captain, who had broken his arm, who I also helped get out of the area. And then the most vivid memories at that point were of not being able to see too far in the distance, maybe about 10 yards.
Did you have protection also?
I had all my gear on, but I didn't really have, I didn't have a face mask. I didn't have a breathing apparatus. I did not have any real eye protection. I just had the shield that came down over my helmet. And a lot of soot and the debris, the pulverized aluminum and whatnot would get in my eyes. Especially if I looked up at 90 degrees, that's when it started to come in. But if I looked down, I could do pretty good. I mean, I could, sort of like look down and maybe see, 5 or 10 yards in front of me, but that was it. But everything was destroyed. I mean, they had all the fire trucks and police cars and ambulances there, and buses and cars. Everything was very neat and lined up, sort of like you were arranging a parade, or you were arranging, you know, everybody to show up and get into a certain spot, but everything was crushed.
Yeah.
And it was very hard to not
process
think that
yeah.
it was, you know, it was like, maybe I wasn't in reality, maybe
Yeah.
I was somewhere else. I think I walked around that area for about half an hour. You know, I knew the towers were down because I'd heard that, but I couldn't really see
Yeah.
into the smoke
Mm-hmm.
as to where they were, but I knew that they were within a few feet of me. I knew that they were probably within 20 or 30 yards, because it just came literally straight down.
Yeah.
And it was very noisy. I mean, there were a lot of explosions, small explosions going on, and terrible noise from the inferno that was within this pile. But I tried to get closer, but I couldn't because of the heat and everything else that was part of the debris pile. So I went into the office building where my sister worked and went up the escalators and looked for her, looked in her office. She wasn't there, so I wrote something on the wall in soot. And 6 months later, she saw it on the internet. Somebody had taken a picture of it.
Wow.
But she was late for work, and as the result of her experience that day, she went to work for the Department of Defense as an attorney. She's a law professor, and went to Iraq, and in 2003, 2004 spent 9 months in Iraq. So we really felt very connected to you know, that incident as a you know, real personal turning point where we felt we need to get more involved. So I was there that Tuesday. I was there Thursday as well. Wednesday was a very hard day. I came back to the office and was just very, very upset. But I went back down and worked removing debris and just trying to be there. What I saw on Thursday was interesting, was that a lot of volunteer firefighters came in to work to try to help. And I saw a lot of kids. I saw a lot of kids that were, you know, in their teens or early 20s. And I asked them very nicely to leave whenever I found them, because I found it to be way too disturbing for young individuals. And there were plenty of people who were there to help. I mean, certainly there were thousands and thousands of FDNY guys there. So, you know, I think that was one thing that I helped do. The other was, you know, just sort of being there, being a physician, clearly marked out as a physician, I think was helpful. People told me that. And then those were my 2 days at the Trade Center, the Tuesday and Thursday. Years later, a couple years ago, I became a physician for the World Trade Center monitoring program for the FDNY, which was really a tremendous honor for me to work with them directly. And I'd had many, many FDNY guys in my practice over the years, and had, you know, watched the changes, physical and psychologic, that they had gone through. So now I actually got to work with the FDNY directly, and that was a tremendous experience. And I think it was also good to be able to say, yeah, I was there.
Exactly.
You
understand.
I understood.
Yeah.
I think that those guys, you know, really were physically injured. I think that they were certainly psychologically scarred. You know, when you think of that day, it's hard to imagine a group that was more affected than them, because they weren't just victims, they were people that went to help and became victims, as opposed to, you know, groups of guys that were, you know, working in the Trade
Right.
Center who were primary victims. So it was a little different. And also the extent to which they had to stay around after the fact, digging out their
Yeah.
brothers, was pretty hard on them. Now we're finding that there's a lot of cancers that are developing, first blood cancers and then probably solid tumors that are developing in the firefighters, particularly with longer exposure down there. I think we're also going to see it in the other first responders, the police and probably the ambulance workers, maybe even construction workers that were down there a lot. So I think that we're just now at 10 years starting to see what we, are hoping would not occur, which is the much higher rate of cancers.
Right.
So that's what's going on. As far as new statistical analysis of the cases, we're now starting to really confirm that that's going on. The next major episode in this was going down to New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina. I was able to go down through Baton Rouge, fly into Baton Rouge.
And how soon after the event were you able to get it?
About 3 days. And I invited 2 other local physicians, Juggy Mahar, who's an internist, and Ken Rauschenbeck, who's an orthopedic surgeon. And we got medical supplies from the local hospital, and we had a private plane. We flew down to Baton Rouge. We brought everything with us, and then we rented a SUV and drove into New Orleans. And I was on the disaster medical assistance team for Rockland County, so I had a federal ID, which enabled us to get down into New Orleans. And of course, as you drive in, you're on a highway. Basically, they close down the highway, then they let you through, and then you get to a point where there was no more highway. It was just water. It looked like a lake. It was just an amazing sight. So then we pulled out the maps and found our way finally getting into New Orleans, and saw some of the damage from the hurricane. Again, we came up to the areas which were inundated by water. We went into the French Quarter, but it was way too dangerous. It was really extremely dangerous. There was a lot of gunfire going on. And I decided that I was not going to stay and potentially endanger myself and the others. So we left, and we went to work at a small hospital in La Paz, which is just north of New Orleans. And we stayed there for a day and worked in a shelter and helped out at the hospital. And then we heard, and we weren't really that needed because there wasn't a lot going on, but we heard that the area in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Biloxi was very badly hit, because that's actually where the hurricane came ashore. So they had the damage from the storm surge and the wind, where New Orleans was like a static flood. Still bad, still devastating, but different scenario to deal with. So we made some phone calls and went up to Gulfport, Mississippi, and we drove in, and the area right along the shore was very badly affected. We went to the Emergency Operations Center, and I introduced myself and told them that I was there, with a background in disaster management and fire service, and I was with a couple of other physicians and see what we could do to help. And we were initially overwhelmed by how much need there was for what we could do. I mean, it was just immediately obvious that we could identify problems and address problems that these people were just overwhelmed by. So the problems that I dealt with specifically were to, first of all, get insulin, because they had lacked insulin. The insulin had not been refrigerated for several days and it got bad. So they reported to us that they had about 35 deaths for lack of insulin in the area. So I made contact with Lilly Pharmaceuticals and called up their headquarters in Indianapolis and arranged to have 1,000 vials of insulin shipped down via the Coast Guard. So I went over to the Coast Guard people that were there in the command center, and I said, you know, I'd like to arrange this. So 12 hours later, we had 1,000 vials of insulin of different kinds, and we distributed it, you know, to the shelters and hospitals in the areas. That was the first thing. Second thing was that we did not know how to get prescriptions filled for people. So people were running out of medication, or they had left it in their home, couldn't get to it. So the next thing was, how do you know where to get a prescription filled? I think 6 out of 8 hospitals in the area had been totally knocked out, and 2 were only partially available. So then we also had the issue of who can prescribe medications now that most of the doctors were out of business. And you had many doctors coming in from out of state that were just driving like a mobile home in, and they'd set up, you know, a clinic out of their mobile home, out of a trailer, on any street corners. How do you know that that's a real doctor? How do you know that he is allowed to prescribe it? How do the people down there in pharmacies know that they should fill a prescription? And how do you send patients in the right direction to find the pharmacy? So it gets a little complicated. So the way I addressed it was, first of all, I was able to get in touch with the governor's office, Haley Barbour's office, and asked that they define the criteria that out-of-state physicians could prescribe. So you needed a valid medical license in your home state, you needed a valid Drug Enforcement Administration license, and you also needed to have a background check done. So we did all 3 of those things, and that enabled out-of-state physicians, at least initially, to prescribe.
The second part, how quickly did that happen?
That took about 6 hours. The other part was to find out which pharmacies were open. So we went to one of the local hospitals that was in partial operation, and we arranged for them to get 3 or 4 people, clerks, to sit down and start calling each pharmacy and see if they were open and what their hours were. The next thing, we took an Excel spreadsheet just on a laptop and put in all the information on pharmacies, you know, were they open, what their hours were, the location, just basic stuff, phone number. And then the next thing was we created a 311 phone number so that people in the area could call. It was just for health care information. And by the end of the 3rd week, they were having 500 phone calls a day. So the idea was that we get the word out that this 311 number was to find out where to go for medical care. That was all pretty successful. The next issue, really, you know, of major importance down there, was to work with the local clinics that had opened up, because so many had opened up. And what we found was that there were a lot of physicians and nurses that had lost their medical licenses and felt that this was an opportunity for them to go and practice medicine again. And it was not uncommon to find physicians and nurses that really were violating the law and ethics in every way. So what we did over the course of the next couple of weeks was to serve notice on each one that once a week they had to come to a local hospital and have a meeting. And for the ones that were bona fide, we were able to resupply them. We were able to coordinate care. I was there for a week, and we actually returned home on September 11th.
Amazing.
So I think we did a lot of good. I was able to come back down 3 weeks later again, spend another few days and see, how things had progressed, and see that some of the stuff that we had initiated was
Yeah.
actually working. And when we had these meetings with the clinics and everybody coming in, they were actually able to help each other. They were able to geographically disperse. And down there, it was interesting that they had a number of ethnic communities that were very set apart from, let's say, the mainstream. So I didn't know that they had a large group of Vietnamese fishermen. And so we sent groups in to deal with those people, senior citizens' homes, special needs
Great.
groups, so we had all those people covered. We also found
Were there
that
language barriers also that you had to overcome, or that was
I was coordinating it, so I wasn't part of that, but no, the language was not really a barrier with the Vietnamese. They were actually, they'd been there for about 10 years or 15 years at least, so they were pretty good. What we were worried about was epidemics of disease beginning, like
Yeah.
cholera or something from,
Sure.
it was very warm down there in September. And so having healthcare groups go into these communities made sure that there wasn't the beginning of an
Right.
epidemic beginning that you'd find out several days after it had occurred. So that was an important thing to do. When we had these organizational meetings, we were also able to resupply a lot of the groups, and they'd really done a lot of good things. From the local physician point of view, and from the local hospital point of view, it was important for them also to have a timeline where these guys started to leave and go home,
Yeah.
because they wanted to reopen their office. Now,
Right.
if a patient can get free doctor care, free medicine, and pay
Interesting.
nothing,
Yeah.
they're not going to go back to the local doctor.
Yeah.
So they were looking for a timeline that we could present an exit strategy for these groups, so we did that as well. I made lifelong friends down there,
I'm sure.
It was just tremendous. I've made a total of 7 trips down, and the last few have been bringing down physicians, firefighters, emergency planners from New York down to Harrison County, Mississippi, and having them sit with the people that ran the operation down in Mississippi. And, so we go down for a day, we all sit around and talk and learn things, and then we come back, and those people have now seen and learned what I learned down there.
And what a great lesson to learn, to be able to go
Yeah.
in and, assemble that kind of a team and that information and put it all together so that it's effective within hours, and, making a phone call and getting a response from all these various companies that wanted to collaborate. That's a wonderful thing that you did. Yeah.
Then I guess the next major thing was the plane in the Hudson.
Sully. Yeah.
So I was in New York that day,
You happened to be there?
happened to be there.
Yeah.
I was picking up some medical equipment, and I got back in my car and I turned on the radio, and they said a plane was in the road. So again, I have the red lights and sirens, so I went, and I wasn't that far away. I was, like Madison and 40th, and this was all the way on the west side, so just drove across town. And I walked into the passenger ferry terminal, and it was very quiet. I didn't know what to expect, but it was very quiet, and everybody had just gotten there off the ferry boat and walked in, and it was looked like an airport lounge. I mean, it was very well appointed. It was a beautiful space, and so I went over to the guy running the medical response, and I told him that I was a physician and that I was there to help. And he said, "Why don't you go over and help that stewardess over there?" Because there was one stewardess who had injured her leg, so I went over to help her. And then we got her off to the hospital, and behind me I heard, "Oh, Dr. Basri, is that you?" And 2 of the passengers on the plane were women that I knew from my hometown, Goshen. and the woman's husband is in the fire department. So like I've known him for 20 years. So it was a nice little reunion.
Yeah.
So I sat with them, and one of the ladies, Lulu, is the oldest passenger on the plane. She was 85.
Oh my gosh.
So I massaged her feet and got her socks off. And, we hung out for a while. Then I walked around, just
That's
introduced
amazing.
myself to other people. I got to meet Sully and the crew, and everybody was in good shape. It was very quiet. It was not like what you'd think, celebration or a lot of people talking on cell phones. It seems like everybody made one phone call, and then after that was really quiet.
Well, the New York waterway, they're trained to respond, and they were there in like a heartbeat, and they did a beautiful job. It was a wonderful thing how many came to help at just the right time. That was the miracle on the Hudson, and I'm sure that your Goshenites think that you're an angel.
Yes.
I think as well they should. Yeah.
So that was a tremendous experience. I mean, for me, and they included me in a book called Brace for Impact, which was all the people in the plane and me. So I got to write a chapter in the book about my experience that day. So that was a great experience.
Yeah. And now, most recently, you're just coming back from Japan.
Just got back from Japan.
And what was that like? I mean,
okay,
how quickly did you get to go to Japan in response to this?
Not really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I wasn't really planning on going to Japan. It wasn't on my agenda. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in San Diego receiving an award for the American College of Physicians, the Oscar E. Edwards Memorial Award for Community Service.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So part of the getting the award is they give you a luncheon. They throw you a luncheon. So they had a very senior physician from Japan. He's like the preeminent physician to the government over there. His name is Kiyoshi Kurakawa. And he spoke at my luncheon. So afterwards I went over and we talked, and I told him about the stuff that I was involved with. And he was interested in getting philanthropic money from the United States, particularly for medical relief and to help the orphans, because there had been thousands of orphans. So we talked about it, and I said, yes, I could help him, present some of the information to philanthropies here in the United States. And then we communicated back and forth over the next few days by email. And within about a week, I realized that if I was going to adequately represent their interests, that it would be good for me to be able to say that I saw it myself. And I also, had read a lot about it, but I didn't feel I really understood it very well. Because a lot of the media attention had been placed on the nuclear reactor. And I also knew from looking just at YouTube video that there was a lot of just conventional destruction by a tsunami wave. So I wanted to see what that was like and be able to adequately, say firsthand, this is what is going on. So I went home one night and I said over dinner, I said, I think I'm going to Japan. So the response I got was from my daughter, who's 21 and graduating college next week. Her reaction was, can I go? And she'd been with me twice to Katrina. So she had been there like 3 weeks after Katrina hit and really been exposed when she was like 16 years old to this huge disaster and had handled it very well and actually come back and done, fundraising and spoken about it and been a real good ambassador of goodwill. And when she asked me, I immediately said yes. I hadn't even given it a second thought. I said, absolutely, yeah. And my son, 17, said that he wanted to go.
My gosh.
So I said, well, you're about the same age your sister was when she went, so that's fine. And the youngest guy, 16, he was delighted that the other guys were leaving. So
Stay home and hold the fort.
So the three of us made plans to go. And I called Dr. Kurokawa up and I said, I'd like to come and see it. And he thought I was kidding.
Yeah.
And then I said, no, really, I'm going to come and I'm going to bring my kids. And he said, well, great. He said,
Yeah.
whatever I can do to help. So we flew commercial to Tokyo about 5 days later.
Yeah.
And then we spent 3 days. And his people facilitated our travels in the disaster area. We flew into Tokyo, changed airports, went to Haneda Airport, which is for the domestic flights, flew up to Akita, which is on the northwest coast of Japan, and then drove 4 hours across the northern width of the country to get to the disaster area. And we went to Miyako, which is probably about 50 miles north of the nuclear reactor. It was right in the center of where the tsunami hit. It also suffered the 9.0 earthquake and then the tsunami, but everything was totally wiped out.
Yeah.
The only areas that were, pretty much preserved were the roads, because the roads were very, very well built. Generally speaking, the roads were elevated above the level where the sea had come in. The topography there is mountains interrupted by a low coastline. And it was along the coastline that all the development had occurred. So all the homes, schools, businesses, seaport area was all inundated by the tsunami. And in most areas you could see that the tsunami was at least 30 or 40 feet tall, but in other areas we heard that it was 130 feet of water. So it went inland up to 4 or 5 miles, not uncommon.
When you were there, did you feel aftershocks?
We did have one. Yeah. We were lying down to go to sleep the first night, and we were laying on a traditional Japanese bed, which is really like a mat on the floor, and it felt like a rolling pin came right under your back real quickly. So that was the one that we felt. While we were there, we took the potassium iodine pill to prevent, any thyroid problem from the radiation. We also traveled extensively up and down the coastline around Miyako. So we traveled an area where there was a lot of devastation. We brought medical supplies from the United States. So we brought a lot of surgical supplies. And then we handed them out as we went to each of the clinics. There were a couple of hospitals that were destroyed. They had a makeshift hospital in one area that we went into. The first floor was wiped out, so everything was going on the second floor. The extent of the damage just could not be more appalling. It was a coastline of probably about 100 miles wiped out, 30,000 dead, half of them just swept out to sea. Whole cities of 60,000 people just wiped out. Huge seagoing ships up on land. And the extent of the destruction was complete. I was at Katrina and saw the destruction from the storm surge, which in Katrina was about 30 feet, and it went inland in some places a mile or two. But and that was complete
the levees
destruction.
broke, and so.
Well, levees were in New Orleans. So talking about Mississippi,
Mississippi, yes.
because New Orleans didn't have the wind.
Right.
But the extent of the destruction was at least as bad in Japan, because the force of the wave coming ashore, and I don't know how much was even the earthquake before it, but just the force of that wave coming ashore just splintered everything. And a lot of wood construction just splintered everything. And left very large debris field
Mm.
going in for many miles. Whereas in Katrina, for the most part, the areas that were affected were only along the coastline with the storm surge. So the wind damage was mild to moderate inland, and all the destruction was pretty much within half mile to a mile of the shore. And this was like 5 miles in, a complete destruction of whole cities. So, you know, we traveled around, got to see a lot. I took about 500 pictures. We got to meet with a lot of people. We had a guide, a translator, and a driver, so we were very well able to get around and communicate with people. And what we found was that many of the schools were located in the low-lying hills, but at least above where the tsunami would hit. The areas where people lived and worked were destroyed by the tsunami. The tsunami hit at 10 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, so the kids were at school and survived. A lot of the parents did not. So that was a really disturbing aspect of their loss. So we saw what we could see. We came back, you know, to report what we had seen, and I feel very strongly that the you know, the media, the world media, has focused way too much on the radiation and the nuclear side of this, and not enough on the, you know, the terrible destruction and loss of life. And these people have a lot of work to do just to clear the debris.
Right.
My advice would be for them to burn as much of the debris as possible, as quickly as possible. But it didn't seem that they're a very dynamic society in terms of responding to a disaster like this. I think that they're, from the people I've spoken to, they're very methodical, and they're going to plan how they're going to get through this. But to the extent that a month after Katrina, a lot of the debris was already in the process of being removed and burned, their progress in this respect is very much impeded. And I would say that, you know, they've only cleared maybe 5% at most of what's out there. So when you think about what they need to do, I mean, obviously they need to recover as many bodies as they can. They need to prevent disease from coming, because there's a lot of standing water. The temperature's going to be getting warm over there now. And they need to, you know, they need to remove this debris so that at least they can think about how they want to plan their reconstruction. Because, you know, once you have that debris removed, you can really start to lay out, you know, what do you want to start putting in different places, and, you know, opening the roads so people can get through and things like that. So I think that, you know, my ability to say, you know, having been to each of these things, I get a little bit more experience, a little more perspective on what goes on. And I went back to Tokyo at the end of the trip, and we sat down and mapped out a lot of, you know, what I thought was, you know, important things that they should be doing. And also to try to put together, you know, proposals where they can go out and get some, you know, financial assistance from various groups and philanthropies, which I think are, you know, are really needed to go to the grassroots level. So we talked about, well, how do you do that? How do you bring in this money from abroad? And what I presented to them was an idea of using the internet in a way that brought together an application such as Google Maps, where you have a layered view of what the area was like before, at the time of the disaster, and then afterwards, and start to map out the key parts of the infrastructure you want to start to rebuild. So if you want to rebuild hospitals, you do it regionally rather than locally. If you want to rebuild seaports, you want to rebuild your transportation, the next thing you might want to do is rebuild maybe some of the senior citizens centers or the schools, and rebuild them again, and in a way that you could use, let's say, architects or civil planners from all around the world
Mhm.
who could contribute
Yeah.
and just add a layer of advice to
Yeah.
this Google's map kind of thing. Then on a
That's
personal level, do like a Facebook where,
Yeah.
let's say you have a community like Middletown, New York wants to befriend Miyako, Japan.
Mhm.
And then people from Middletown could meet people that live there, and they could plan on, let's say, rebuilding a library. And you
Yeah,
could put
that's
up a
great.
plan for a library, and then you could have people in Middletown saying, okay, that's our cause, you know, our Kiwanis, our Rotary clubs, we're gonna work towards that, you know, rebuilding. For the orphans, we talked a lot about how to get them educated and, you know, trying to give them maybe a year or two in the United States, or, you know, if people were open to adoption, you know, where Americans could adopt, you know, some of the orphans from over there. We talked about maybe getting some of them to summer camp over here, you know, to try to get them out of, you know, where they were. I think a lot of the summer camps would really like to have some kids, not only that they could help, but their own campers would get to learn from, you know, and see, you know, firsthand, well, these are the people that were affected by it. So we had a lot of ideas we put out there, and we've been communicating daily on all this stuff.
As far as your kids are concerned, did you debrief with them after this event, and what did they glean personally from it? I'm sure it was very hard to process,
Yeah.
but very moving too. I mean, you know, planting a seed like that, you know, is that can change your whole life.
It may.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens there. But I think that
But
they
they
had a
were
lot of
compelled
that.
to say, "Take me with you," which
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
You know.
They're looking forward to speaking to other kids their own age
Yeah.
and telling them what they saw. And
Sharing the
they've
story.
done, you know, through Facebook. I mean, these kids right now, they put up all of their pictures on Facebook and their experiences and all that. And so they've had a lot of interest that way. They're going to do fundraisers, and they're also going to do what they can to remain in contact with people that they met over there.
Yeah.
Because I think that that's a big part of, you know, that humanity side. When we were over there, we saw no foreigners. There was no foreign assistance.
Yeah.
There were no foreigners. There were nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a closed society. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, anybody could go over there and try to help out. It was shocking that, you know, their own relief efforts were at such a low level, and then it was non-existent for even foreigners coming over. You know, I would think that, you know, with Katrina, we had people coming from all over the world to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
You know, and to be candid about it, 3 weeks after Katrina, and each time I went back down to Mississippi, what you saw thousands of Latinos, you know, Mexican workers
Yeah.
coming up to, you know, clear
Yeah.
debris and rebuild and do whatever.
Yeah.
And that kind of a labor force, which, you know, we almost take for granted,
Right.
they just don't have. So I think that their whole process of rebuilding is going to be quite protracted.
Well, it's been an amazing education over the span of all these years, you know, and escalating. I hope there's not a larger event in the future for you. But thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
know, we're very moved by what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now this